in Canadian GAAP, we used to have a section called where you would put these extraordinary gains and losses in. So let's say Alberta generally doesn't have earthquakes, except there was a little one last night apparently somewhere. I don't know if any of you felt it. I didn't, unfortunately. I always think it's more exciting to have, stuff like that. But anyway. So if we did have a large earthquake here, where we never get them all and they don't do anything, then any losses would have gone into extraordinary items. What that does is clearly separate it out from regular occurring stuff. And so EPS was divided without that and with it, just like, that was really long. Oh, discontinued. So there was discontinued and extraordinary. However, trying to define that became very difficult. And around the time 2001, when everybody started saying, well, is terrorism and the attack and all the losses, is that an extraordinary item? And they actually came to the conclusion in the States with FASB, because theirs was similar to ours, that no, it's going to happen more and more. It's a recurring item, so it shouldn't be an extraordinary. And shortly after that, they started thinking of getting rid of, and eventually did, get into that category because it was so hard to define, and different countries defined it different, and even different industries defined it differently. So we don't have that anymore. What we do instead is we disclose, okay? So this doesn't exist anymore. Disclose. So it's up to us in our judgment to say it's non-recurring. Right? Because investors, they're looking for income that carries on so they can predict. Well, if we get these non-recurring items, that's not going to help them predict. Okay, then we're going to talk about the best accounting policies. And the best policy is not necessarily best for society. So, mark to market in the US is the same as what's called something different. Before the crash in 2007, everybody was using fair value, and in the US, mark to market. It was the best accounting policy. Stocks should be shown at their fair value, right, what they're worth. However, when everything started crashing, some industries were fine. It wasn't their fault they were crashing. The banks. So there was argument that they shouldn't be using mark to market anymore. So even though it's the best accounting policy, in this case, what it didn't reflect is the value of shares in the long term. Because we knew they were going to go back up, we just knew it was going to take time. So they actually, the FASB, suspended mark to market and said they could just record it at cost. Okay? So for example, mark to market was suspended during crash in US. The third thing, and it's similar, it's an example of the best accounting policy again, is RRA, or that reserve recognition reserve recognition. My God, I don't know what the A stands for. But oil companies, it'll come to me. Oil companies have reserves in the ground. So that was reserve recognition, RRA, which we talked about earlier. So the calculations actually, when it was being run as required, and that was a long time ago, you guys probably weren't even born, highly statistical. You built in used signs and probability functions for how much could be there, how much could be useful, how much you could get out. So in terms of accuracy, it wasn't 100%, but it gave a fair valuation and was consistent across all companies. So it was a decent policy. However, investors did it. Sometimes it was way off, and it just became a disaster. So for that, they decided to just make it as a disclosure in Canada. So RRA, again, it's a good relevant calculation. But not best for, as it is unreliable. Disclosure only. So now we're going to look at kind of the history of how people started testing whether accounting information does anything for the stock market, gives any useful information. Does anyone still need this? Okay. Then I'll scan these and post these after in case you missed anything. So, research study. I wanted to find out if annual financial statements influenced investor decisions. How would you design your study? So you're going to make an experiment. You're sitting here going, we got to give out all this at great cost, right? Is it actually benefiting? Does it make a difference? What would you do? What kinds of things could you do to figure out if it's working? You guys are so quiet. I understand. You can't even. Usually, you guys, some people whisper it and then I can see it, right? But no. Well, let's say you're going to do some kind of survey. Who would you survey? No one. Okay. That's good. Well, would you survey investors? Yeah, to see, did they read your stuff? Did they change their reaction? Everything like that, right? Now, as you know, that's very subjective. So another way you could look at it is actually look at the stock market trends and see what happened the day you released your information. Now, we'll talk about the first study, which was in '68. You can imagine we didn't have the minute-to-minute stock prices like we do now, accessible to everyone. So you could do a survey. You could look at stock market prices. Just let's add that. So look at stock market prices when you release information. And the factors we consider is key. Did investors read our financial report? and of course the stock price. So, now we're going to start looking at two. The first one, the second one's in the next chapter. The information perspective on decision usefulness. And what people came up with when they first looked at investors is, do investors want to make decisions on their own from gathering information and sitting and looking at it and making it, or do they want to be told, led, that yes, we're going to increase in the future and it's going to be this, this, and this, okay? The information perspective says investors want to make their own decisions. So we, as an accounting profession, better provide them with good information. So investors want to make their own decisions. We concentrate on providing useful information, not valuation. So valuation, that's where we were looking at fair value statements. But here they're saying disclosure is more important. Yep, we had profit of $3 million, but $800,000 of that was a one-time non-recurring gain. They want us to give additional info above and beyond just the financial statements. Okay, so basically we're giving them the raw data on their own. Does that make sense? And of course, between the two perspectives, they aren't, everybody isn't one or the other. You're going to have different. Obviously, the more knowledge you have, the more you'll be able to take the raw data and create your own decisions, right? But there's also a lot of people that don't have that knowledge. Okay, so now for the next few slides, we're looking at the research question, because this is critical. Will the market price of the share respond to information, in particular net income? And remember, EPS is directly tied to net income. And we're going to predict yes, because if it doesn't, it's a very sad day for us. Okay, so first we're going to do some predictions about investor behavior. They have prior beliefs. So right now, if I asked you what do you think about Apple stock, you've got a belief on its riskiness and how much of a return you'll get in the future, right? Is ours all the same? No, even if we spent half an hour right now studying Apple, we'd come up with different conclusions, okay? So we all have prior beliefs. Hopefully, if you're knowledgeable, it includes current and future earnings cash flows. So you're looking at past historical data, what we give you, and trying to predict. Of course, different investors have different amounts of information. Even if we all had the annual report, including management discussion and analysis, we have different pieces of information because we process it differently and we know different levels. I mean, we're all pretty consistent because we're all in the same boat. And different investors have different abilities. That's one of the reasons they say that pension plans, huge, are investors that keep the market semi-strong efficient because they're run by people who are skilled. So they're CFAs. So you can trust them to hopefully make the best decisions rather than someone just sitting at their computer and being a day trader, right? So, if we outline, what do we predict? Well, hopefully they're going to analyze net income. If good news is received, they're going to revise beliefs upward. So, their beliefs about future performance increase. Well, if you just got good news on some shares, what are you going to do? You're going to buy more of them. That increases both trading volumes and share prices. Now, if bad news was received, what are you going to do? Sell them, which also increases trading volume, but that means the share price is going to go down. Okay. So the research question is, we've got the prediction and the outline of the research problem. Does it actually happen? Okay. Now, bear in mind, we're starting at the beginning. Whenever you're looking, what you start with is the seminal study, so the study that started the whole thing. And that's what we're going to do right now. So it goes way back to 1968. And William Beaver completed a study in 68 that confirmed increased trading activity after net income was released. Okay? So that's good. Net income in, and the share price responded, whether it was good or bad. But you also have to consider, did it change in response, or was it some other factor that did it? When did net income become known? So was it known on a Tuesday and then by next Tuesday the share price changed? Or was it known on Tuesday and the share price changed by Wednesday, right? Was there bad news relative to expectations? Now remember, no, it's just like grades in a class, right? Or prices on a car or whatever, rent prices. All of us have our figure hoping for. And so good news to someone else might be bad news to someone else. Okay? And what are other factors affecting share price other than? So it could be the whole market, industry factors, maybe they changed CEOs. And that's either good news or bad news. Okay, so what they did was they needed to separate firm and market information. So this is the return on the market. And this each firm. So you don't need to know about the formula, but there's the slide. So market return was here. This was the expected return. So they expected it here. But if this was the actual, the difference in here, that's what they looked at. And if you want to look at the actual calculations, it's the CAP-M equation. We talked about it last chapter, but you don't have to know how to calculate it. If you do, put that in to your answers, but you don't have to. I wouldn't specifically ask. Okay, so that was the first study. The second one was the Ball and Brown study. So it's an event study. Is it a market response to a certain event, release of current net information? 1968 New York Stock Exchange companies over a 9-year period. So they needed to figure out, is something going to be good news or bad news? How can we interpret what it is? They can't go asking all of the investors. So what they did was say prior year's earnings. So let's say they earned, I don't know, 6% last year. That was their benchmark. So if they earned 7% this year, good news. If they earned 5% this year, bad news. Does that make sense? So prior year's earnings were the benchmark, or it's called proxy if you're reading studies, for good news, bad news. So if last year 6%, this year we had 4%, that would be bad news, or 7%, that would be good news. Okay, so here were their results. So what it's showing is the share price of firms and with good news. And it's months. Now notice months. They're looking at months rather than now when we could practically look at minutes. Okay? Months relative to the annual report information. So here was the annual report. Roughly. So if there was bad news, what happened? It went down. If there was good news, it went up when the annual report came out. Okay? But what in the months leading up to the report being released? The firms that eventually released good news, what happened? Their prices were going up. So the market was anticipating the good news. Because during the year, firms make their CEOs come out and say, oh, we had a great quarter, we did this, that, and the other thing. So people are going, revising their expectations. Ooh, we thought it was going to be 6, maybe it's going to be 7. Okay, share price is going to go up. Okay? This time is a wide window. The market anticipated Good news before the annual report. And then same idea with bad news. Okay, and they still gave in 68 stock prices. You know, they were published in the paper. Can you imagine? I can't even think back to then. So they had stock price changes that would also influence what they were thinking, especially if they were investors that followed the market rather than just making their own decision and doing what they did regardless of anyone else. So what this did show is there was a reaction to the annual report close to when it was released. As well as later, not too much. There was a little movement later, and that's called drift. But there was more at the beginning. So it was released when it was released, as well as earlier, and a little drift after. Okay, everybody good with that? Questions? It's fairly straightforward. And like we said, it's the earliest study that showed exactly what happened. Anyone still need this? Okay, so Ball and Brown study, some of the conclusions. Good news companies had positive securities return after the earning. Bad news had negative. We saw that already. Subsequent studies found the market anticipated news for the earnings release because investors were getting info from other sources. And other sources could be industry sources. It could be non-financial statement sources like announcements or press releases. So, for example, let's say we were in the oil industry. We might not have released our financial statements yet, but if two other large companies released it and said, oh, everything's looking good, things are going well, we did well this year, what are people going to assume about us? Same thing, maybe not to the same extent, maybe we're smaller, that kind of thing, and from the rest of the industry. We'll talk about that in the second half of the course. So then they had to go and try and narrow it down because they really wanted to see just what the financial information did, okay? So, looking at causation versus association or correlation. If there was a narrow window of time